Okay, I think we're connected, and we'll be starting momentarily. Everything looks good this end. Uh, oh, hang on a second here. I'm just trying to adjust the chat window. It's going weird on me. No, never mind. Okay. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So I want to start today what will probably be a at least 3-part series looking at the Brahmajala Sutta, which is a Digha Nikaya 1. Today I'll make a few preliminary remarks and probably start in on the text. And I'm really going to focus on the second half, the what's called the net of views, the analysis of the Buddhist analysis of 62 wrong views. The Digha Nikaya is usually listed as the first of the 4 Nikayas, and according to Bhikkhu Bodhi, in the introduction to one of his translations, he offers some speculation as to the division of the Sutta Pitaka into Nikayas, that each Nikaya had a specific purpose. And I think he has a strong point. He makes a strong case there. And the Digha Nikaya, he suggests, was the collection of suttas that were suitable for introducing Buddhism to new people. And taking that as a first idea, can also, I think, speculate as to the ordering of the individual suttas in the canon. They certainly are not chronological. They don't follow the order in which the Buddha gave them. I think we can assume that the ordering was worked out by later redactors, perhaps at the first council, perhaps at some later time. So the Brahmajala Sutta, being the first sutta of the Digha Nikaya, was what the Buddhist community as a whole thought would be a suitable text for the first introduction to the Buddhist teachings. And I think we see in this sutta the particular emphasis is to differentiate the Buddha's teaching and doctrine and practice from that of other contemporary Indian schools. The first part of the sutta, which I'm not going to go over in detail, is this section on morality. Deals with a number of practices that samanas should not engage in, and the Buddhist community of bhikkhus would stand out from other samanas in the purity of their conduct by not following these ways. And although I'm not going to go into it in detail, it is an interesting compendium from a historical and sociological point of view. It includes various kind of games that were played at the time, as well as various occult and prognostication practices like astrology and so on. So it is kind of interesting to go through it as a glimpse into ancient Indian life. But then when we turn to the section that's called the Net of Views, which is the second and larger section of the sutta, dealing with an analysis of 62 wrong views, we have a survey of the ideas and speculations that were present in India at the time of the Buddha. Indian civilization was very prolific in terms of philosophies and schools of thought, speculation, and it's really something that fascinates me is comparing that to Greek civilization. Both were very precocious, brilliant civilizations, and they took somewhat different approaches. And in India, the emphasis was always on the inner life, figuring out the nature of mind, the nature of man as a being, and his destiny, and so forth. Whereas a lot of the Greek speculation was about figuring out the nature of the universe. It was outward looking rather than inward looking. So the 62 wrong views listed are sometimes thought of as being some kind of a matrix, a scheme of analyzing different philosophical positions in an orderly way, and it is somewhat that. But I think it's more of a listing of actual traditional schools. Some of them we can pinpoint, and some we can't. I would recommend anyone who's interested in pursuing this, an interesting book. This here, it's an older book. Here it's Jayantalaki's Early Buddhist Theory of Knowledge. Its main theme is an examination of epistemology and Buddhist thought. But in the course of the work, he identifies a lot of the schools from the Brahmajala Sutta. Some of them are fully formed schools, and others can be identified with a single teacher, often one of the Upanishadic writers or teachers. I guess they weren't writers. All the teachings being passed on orally in those times. So in the Brahmajala Sutta as a whole, in these 62 wrong views, most of them will fall into the category of either eternalist or annihilationist. The eternalist view is, as the name suggests, is Sasatawada, is that there is an eternal abiding principle or essence in human beings, which in the Indian context was often called the Atman. The annihilationist view, Uchedawada, holds that beings are cut off and terminated absolutely at death. So this is the materialist or physicalist view. And most of the views will fall into one of the other camps, one or the other of those camps. So today I just want to go through the first section, which is pretty brief. And I'm reading from Maurice Welsh's translation, The Long Discourses. There are amongst some ascetics and Brahmins who are partly. Oh no, I'm sorry. I've jumped ahead here. I'm going back to where I want. There are amongst some ascetics and Brahmins who are speculators about the past, having fixed views about the past, and who put forward various speculative views about the past in 18 different ways. On what basis, on what grounds do they do so? So it's the first category in which the Buddha analyzes these views is whether they're oriented towards the past or the future. And there are some ascetics and Brahmins who are eternalist, who proclaim the eternity of self and the world in 4 ways. Here amongst a certain ascetic or Brahmin has by means of his own effort, exertion, application, earnestness, and right attention attained to such a state of mental concentration that he thereby recalls past existences, 1 birth, 2 births, 3 births, 5 births, 10, 100, 1,000, 100,000 births, several hundred, several thousand, several 100,000 births. There my name was so-and-so, my clan was so-and-so, my caste was so-and-so, my food was such and such. I experienced such and such pleasant and painful conditions. I lived for so long. Having passed away from there, I arose there. There my name was so-and-so, etc. And having passed away from there, I arose here. Thus he remembers various past lives and their conditions and details. And he says, the self and the world are eternal, barren like a mountain peak, and set firmly as a post. So before I go on, I'll comment on this. Here we have an example of someone having accomplished a deep state of samadhi to the point of realizing their past lives and seeing their past lives going back a very long time, over thousands of births, and then misapprehending that and using that as a basis for the idea that the self and the world are eternal. This is something, a good principle to bear in mind, that there are many powerful experiences that one can arrive at in meditation, and they can be misinterpreted, and that one can come to false ideas, false conclusion based on an experience that one has had. You know? So having seen his past lives, he assumes that there is some immortal self that moves from life to life. And the world is also equally eternal. You know, that he's appearing again and again in the world. So neither himself nor the world changes. The world, self and world are eternal, barren, like a mountain peak, set firmly as a post. So the idea is that nothing really changes. That change is an illusion or a very peripheral phenomena, that the universe actually remains basically the same. These beings rush around, they circulate, pass away, and re-arise, but this remains eternal. Why so? I have by means of effort, exertion, attained to such a state of mental concentration that I have thereby recalled my past existences. This is how I know the self and world are eternal. This is the first way in which some ascetics and Brahmins proclaim that the eternity of the self and the world. I'd mentioned the comparison with the Greeks. There was a Greek philosopher, Parmenides, who came to a somewhat similar idea. He taught that change was an illusion, that nothing ever really changes. And that idea influenced Plato, his idea of the eternal forms. You know, that change in the world is an illusion, that the reality is unchanging. There's also a later development in India of the Sankhya school, which taught another version or variation of this, and that the everything exists in potential all the time, and what we see as things coming into being and passing out of being are just manifesting from some kind of eternal pre-existing state. Another book that I've got here is the all-embracing net of views. It's the Brahmajala commentary, translated by Bhikkhu Bodhi. And in the commentary, there's a critique of that Samkhya view without naming it as Sankhya. But it seems to be evident that that's what the commentary, which is written much later than the suttas, is critiquing. So that's the first way in which some ascetics and Brahmins decide that the world is eternal. The second and third ways are really just variations of this one. The only difference being how many lifetimes the person can remember. In the first example, he can remember back to hundreds of thousands of lifetimes. And then in the second example, he can remember back 10 kappas, kappa being a world age. And the third example, someone can remember back 40 kappas. But they all have greater powers of samadhi, and they have greater penetration into past lives. The Buddha, of course, is said on his enlightenment night in the first watch of the night to have recalled all his past lives, going back thousands and thousands of kappas. Then the fourth way is different. What is the fourth way? Here, a certain ascetic or Brahman is a logician. That Pali is taki, and Bhikkhu Bodhi translated as a rationalist. A logician, a reasoner, hammering it out by reason, following his own line of thought. He argues the self and the world are eternal, barren like a mountain peak, set firmly as a post. These beings rush round, circulate, pass away, re-arise, but this remains forever. This is the fourth way in which some ascetics and Brahmins proclaim the eternity of the self and the world. And the commentary goes on to give, first of all, a general critique of the idea of philosophies hammered out by reason, as the phrase is. That the reason is often motivated by desire. One wishes the self to be eternal, and so one comes up with arguments to explain that or justify that. Then it goes on to say that there are four classes of these reasoners. One class reasons from hearsay, meaning they haven't worked this out on their own, but have been heard it from others, from some other teacher, and agreed with it. There's ones who are motivated by feeling, ones who are motivated by a very partial memory of past lives and want to explain it. And the fourth kind are those who arrive at it in purely by logical reasoning. So these then cover the entirety of these four classes of theorists who teach eternity of the self and the world based on looking at the past. And this section concludes, this the monks the Tathagata understands. These viewpoints thus grasped and adhered to will lead to such and such destinations in another world. This the Tathagata knows and more, but he is not attached to that knowledge. And being thus unattached, he has experienced for himself perfect peace. And having truly understood the arising and passing away of feelings, their attraction and peril, and deliverance from them, the Tathagata is liberated without remainder. There are monks, other matters profound, hard to see, hard to understand, peaceful, excellent, beyond mere thought, subtle to be experienced by the wise, which the Tathagata, having realized them by his own super-knowledge, proclaims, and about which those who would truthfully praise the Tathagata would rightly speak. So that's the conclusion to that section. It's interesting that the Buddha puts emphasis here on the Vedanusati, contemplation or knowledge of mindfulness of feelings. I think this can be a sort of a general principle for any kind of view that people hold. They like to flatter themselves and think it's based on reason, but it's very often just based on feeling, and reason comes in afterwards as a way of justifying or explaining it. So I'll stop there, and next week we'll go on to the next section. Let me try and give me a second here. I've got the chat in some weird format. It's almost unreadable. I got to try and get that corrected. There we go. Okay. Okay, let's see what we got in the chat or questions. The picture comes in really vibrant on your new computer. Yes, that's really, I'm really happy with the performance. I was getting to the point where I was becoming almost impossible to do these kind of online things. Next one, the Digha Nikaya seems to me to have a more polemical and hagiographic emphasis than Majjhima. Does that mean it's more likely to be composed later than from earlier suttas? That's possible. I think some of the suttas do have that kind of sense. They may have been later or worked over. But I think it's more a question of the selection for the purposes of Sabika Bodhi calls it like the missionary Nikaya. It was what would be given to convert people to Buddhism or for the first education of brand new Buddhists. And it does have a polemical and sometimes a hagiographic emphasis. The Majjhima is the one that people would be encouraged to study second. That is, it's more technical, it gets into the details of the teachings more. Bhante, my current aditan is to listen to the 5 Nikayas, one per day, Monday through Friday. Is it a good idea or better to stick to one Nikaya, finish it and move on to the next? Thank you. Yeah, I would think that's maybe a bit better. I think if you're going through the Nikayas one, like as I understand, you're saying like you listen to the Digha, for example, on Monday, then Majjhima on Tuesday. That's okay too. I mean, I don't think it's fixed. The traditional way would be to start with the Digha, then the Majjhima, and then either the Anguttara or the Samyutta. How to escape from troubles caused by devas? Give suttas related to it. The sutta that comes to mind is the I'm not going to remember the name exactly. Atataniya Sutta. I believe it's in the Samyutta. It's often chanted as a paritta. It's for protection from yakas and mischievous devas and so on. You'll find it easily, and if you have a chanting book, look under the section on parittas. Is Mount Sinnaru an invisible pyramid axis that the solar system is contained in? That's one possible theory I've seen suggested. There is a book, it's quite interesting. It's got some intriguing ideas in it. It's called Hamlet's Mill, and it's dealing with it doesn't deal primarily with India, but more with Greece. But it deals with ancient mythologies and cosmologies related to astronomy, the movements of the stars and planets. And his thesis is that all the myths of the Greeks in particular were based on movements of the movements of the sky. I've heard this called astrotheology. And his explanation for Mount Sinnaru was that it represents what's called the axis mundi. That is the imaginary or invisible line that runs from the North Pole to the South Pole of the Earth, that is extended infinitely into space. So you can imagine, a line running through the Earth up to the north. In the north, it runs up to the Polaris, the North Star, and in the south, whatever. But it's like an infinite line from the North Pole. But they wouldn't have really had much connection with the South Pole in early times. And Mount Sinnaru is seen as, as a mythological or poetical representation of that. The Buddha criticizes thinkers for views about the future. How does the Buddha argue against skeptical doubts about non-retrogression of higher states of enlightenment? I don't know if the Buddha specifically addresses that, but you will find arguments in the Katawatu, the book of debates, the last book of the Abhidhamma that was composed probably at the time of King Asoka. And there were some schools then that taught that arahants could fall back. And in the Katawatu argues that they can't fall back, that once they're purified, there's no basis for impure states to arise again. Next one, in what proportions to do samatha meditation to vipassana? One day samatha, another day do vipassana. I don't think you can really make a fixed rule for that. I think it's generally good to do samatha meditation first as a prelude to vipassana. And generally, I advise people if they have a busy life with a lot of duties and things going on, that a lot of concerns, that they've only got a limited time to meditate, they're better to just stick to samatha, because what they really need is peace and tranquility in the mind. And they're not going to, if they've got a lot going on in their life, vipassana is not going to be very fruitful for just an hour a day. Next one, I work with dogs, and sometimes I take enjoyment hugging and kissing them, but I have no desire to take them home with me or any other dog. Is that considered sense desire? Yeah, that's sense desire. That's pretty harmless form of it, but the lower end, let's say, the ladder of problematic sense desires, but it's still a sense desire. You enjoy the company of the dog. Bhante, is Parita for Deva's protection is enough? They cause many delusions, psychosomatic illness. How to escape that? How to keep the mind without getting influenced by them? Well, first of all, keep the precepts. That itself is a big protection, particularly the precept against intoxicants. Don't take any intoxicating drugs or alcohol. Practice metta. One of the benefits of metta is that one is beloved by devas, so they won't be causing trouble for you. And chant the paritas. Okay. Okay, so I think we'll stop there. I've got something I need to do this evening, and we'll see you again next week. And I'm glad we seem to have gotten the technical issues sorted out, and everything seems to be working fine. So, thank you for attending.